Stop everything right now. Look closely at the data streams hiding behind the flashing headlines. While the mainstream television networks in Washington are currently broadcasting endless loops of glowing success regarding Operation Epic Fury, while the anchors confidently tell you that the supreme leadership of the adversary has been permanently removed from the equation, something absolutely terrifying is unfolding in the pitch-black waters of the Gulf of Oman. According to the latest maritime tracking data provided by Bloomberg just hours ago, 329 very large crude carriers have simultaneously gone completely dark. They have deliberately severed their automatic identification systems. They are currently drifting in dead silence, not loading, not transiting, just sitting paralyzed in the open water. I am going to show you why the narrative you are being fed is a dangerous illusion. Washington and Tel Aviv are operating under the assumption that they just executed a flawless strategic decapitation. They believe that by neutralizing the top tier of the command structure, they have successfully secured the vital energy corridors of the globe and re-established absolute deterrence. It is not a victory. It is a catastrophic miscalculation of historic proportions. They did not eliminate the core threat. They eliminated the only institutional safety mechanism that kept the regional factions contained. By creating an immediate power vacuum at the very top, they have inadvertently forced a centralized military structure to fracture into dozens of highly autonomous, heavily armed non-state actors. The conventional chain of command is gone. What remains is a decentralized network operating without rules, without borders, and without any fear of diplomatic blowback. If you are watching this screen and realizing that the institutional elite are entirely blind to the macroeconomic disaster they just triggered, type the word blind in the comments right now. Let me make this perfectly clear. The television networks want you to focus on the precision strikes and the political theater. But global shifts of this magnitude are not decided by press conferences. They are decided by supply chains, crude oil futures, and maritime insurance premiums. Let us shift our focus from the brightly lit briefing rooms of the Capitol, directly down to the cold, unforgiving reality of the Hormuz choke point. The suits believe they have successfully closed the chapter, but out there on the dark water, the real asymmetric warfare is just waking up. The real asymmetric warfare is just waking up because the fundamental architecture of the adversary was never designed to rely on a single mortal leader. Intelligence back channels are currently operating under the assumption that the recent targeted strikes have completely shattered the centralized chain of command in the region. Washington is proudly calling this a textbook strategic decapitation. They are celebrating what they perceive as a total institutional collapse. But let me show you the terrifying paradox that the media is refusing to acknowledge. When you deliberately dismantle the governing body of a highly militarized state, you are not erasing its capabilities. You are erasing its accountability. The leadership that was just removed from the equation was the only entity that still cared about international treaties. They were the ones who still calculated the diplomatic cost of a full-scale global conflict. They held the leash. By tearing down that institutional framework through absolute brute force, the operation has birthed a massive and uncontrollable power vacuum. The overarching military apparatus has not evaporated, it has merely mutated. It has splintered into dozens of independent armed factions and heavily equipped proxy networks spread across thousands of square miles. These are highly trained non-state actors who no longer have a centralized capital city to defend. They have no embassies to protect. They have no vulnerable infrastructure to worry about. And more importantly, they have absolutely no reason to negotiate with anyone. This is the catastrophic backfire of overwhelming military might. The planners in the war rooms genuinely believed that brute force would solve the strategic equation. Instead, their much-celebrated decapitation strike did not destroy the military machine. It merely cut the brakes off a speeding train. To understand the sheer magnitude of this intelligence failure, we must step back in time. We must look back at how this entire decentralized system was deliberately engineered over decades to survive exactly this kind of catastrophic loss. We must look back at how this entire decentralized system was deliberately engineered over decades to survive exactly this kind of catastrophic loss. This is not a new playbook. Look closely at the geopolitical pivots of the last 20 years across the Middle East. Every single time a major Western power utilized overwhelming kinetic force to induce a regime collapse or decapitate a sovereign leadership, it birthed a far more lethal decentralized insurgency. From the shattered institutional frameworks of the early 2000s to the endless proxy wars of the last decade, the pattern is absolute. The intelligence agencies knew this historical precedent. They knew the ideological doctrine of their adversary was literally built around the concept of ultimate sacrifice, and they chose to strike anyway. The architects of Operation Epic Fury fundamentally misunderstood the psychological resilience of their target. They assumed that a massive demonstration of firepower would force a diplomatic surrender. Instead, the catastrophic backfire of these punitive measures has permanently severed all avenues of de-escalation. The diplomatic fracture is absolute. Regional embassies are being evacuated in dead silence. The diplomatic human toll is zero remaining channels for negotiation. The targeted strike did not deter the adversary. It validated their deepest ideological narratives and weaponized their resolve. The remaining military commanders are no longer fighting for a flag or a capital. They are executing a decentralized war of attrition. When you apply maximum pressure to a conventional military, it breaks. But when you apply maximum pressure to an ideological network designed for asymmetric warfare, it simply disperses and strikes back from the shadows. The centralized target has been removed, but the underlying threat has multiplied exponentially. This brings us to the ultimate, terrifying, unanswered strategic question circulating in the classified briefings right now. If a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier strike group cannot locate and neutralize a completely decentralized ghost, who exactly is going to protect the oil barrels floating in the choke point? Let us shift our gaze from the ashes of the political capital directly to the burning waters of the energy transit routes. Let us shift our gaze from the ashes of the political capital directly to the burning waters of the energy transit routes. The sheer maritime hubris of the Western Naval Command is currently on full display in the Strait of Hormuz. Washington deployed its most advanced multi-billion-dollar carrier strike groups to project absolute dominance over the region. They firmly believed that the mere silhouette of a nuclear-powered supercarrier would be enough to guarantee the free flow of 30% of the global oil supply. But the reality of asymmetric warfare is brutally unforgiving. You cannot deter a swarm of autonomous, low-cost, one-way attack drones with a flagship designed for conventional combat. The non-state actors and proxy networks now operating freely along the jagged coastlines do not need to physically sink a carrier to win this engagement. They only need to make the waters mathematically uninsurable for commercial transit, and they have already succeeded. Look at the raw economic data coming out of London. Marine war risk insurance premiums have skyrocketed by over 500% in a single night. Commercial shipping lines are declaring force majeure, flatly refusing to sail their vessels into the active targeting grids. 329 supertankers are currently paralyzed because the institutional collapse onshore has birthed a highly lethal decentralized blockade offshore. These armed factions are deploying advanced sea mines and coordinated drone swarms launched from untraceable civilian-style speedboats. This is the catastrophic backfire in its purest, most destructive form. The massive kinetic attempt to secure the strait through Operation Epic Fury has achieved the exact opposite. It has completely choked the very economic artery it was deployed to protect. The majestic warships are now trapped in a defensive posture, forced to play an unwinnable game of asymmetric attrition. They are burning through multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles just to swat down aerial assets assembled for a few $1,000s. It is a completely unsustainable equation of military overextension. And while the naval commanders stare blankly at their saturated radar screens, the true devastation is silently spreading far beyond the Middle East. Let us pivot our analysis from the localized kinetic blockade in the Gulf directly to the macroeconomic panic currently sweeping through the financial markets. It is a completely unsustainable equation of military overextension, and while the naval commanders stare blankly at their saturated radar screens, the true devastation is silently spreading far beyond the Middle East. Let us pivot our analysis from the localized kinetic blockade in the Gulf directly to the macroeconomic panic currently sweeping through the financial markets. While the Western military-industrial complex aggressively cheers for the tactical strikes of Operation Epic Fury, the supreme architects in Beijing and Moscow are quietly moving their grand chess pieces into absolute checkmate. They are watching the global superpower willingly trap itself in a decentralized war of attrition. They understand the catastrophic backfire of this decapitation strategy better than anyone in Washington. Every single multi-million-dollar missile fired at a low-cost drone in the Strait of Hormuz is a direct drain on the air defense stockpiles that were supposed to deter other global conflicts. The deterrence vacuum is widening by the hour. According to the latest energy market data, we are witnessing the structural collapse of the paper economy. When 329 supertankers cannot move, the physical supply of energy completely detaches from the financial derivatives. We are not just looking at a temporary disruption. We are looking at a permanent geopolitical pivot. The global south is watching the heavily militarized sea lanes become entirely paralyzed by non-state actors, and they are rapidly realizing that the fiat system backed by naval dominance is a fragile illusion. As crude oil futures violently surge toward $130 a barrel, the resulting economic ripple will systematically dismantle supply chains, obliterate profit margins, and ignite a tidal wave of inflation across the hemisphere. The rival superpowers do not need to fire a single shot. They are simply waiting for the financial architecture of the West to implode under the sheer weight of its own maritime arrogance. The chessboard has fundamentally changed. The targeted decapitation did not secure the empire. It aggressively accelerated its institutional collapse. And the clock is now aggressively ticking down toward the most critical 72 hours of modern financial history. The chessboard has fundamentally changed. The targeted decapitation did not secure the empire. It aggressively accelerated its institutional collapse. And the clock is now aggressively ticking down toward the most critical 72 hours of modern financial history. Now let me show you exactly how this ends. I am going to outline the 3 definitive scenarios currently sitting on the desks of the highest level intelligence directors. Scenario 1 is absolute macroeconomic fracture. The 329 paralyzed supertankers remain dead in the water. The non-state actors maintain their decentralized blockade through continuous asymmetric strikes. Under this trajectory, the price of Brent crude does not just touch $130 a barrel. It violently shatters the $150 threshold. We are looking at a total systemic breakdown of the global supply chain, triggering a devastating inflationary shockwave that completely neutralizes every single monetary policy tool in the West. Your paper wealth will evaporate while the anchors on television are still analyzing the success of the initial airstrikes. Scenario 2 is a perpetual decentralized war of attrition. The armed factions simply refuse to engage in conventional diplomacy. They do not need to. They force the multi-billion-dollar naval fleets to remain permanently trapped in the Hormuz choke point. The superpower is forced to burn through millions of dollars in highly advanced interceptor missiles every single day just to swat down low-cost suicide drones. This catastrophic backfire bleeds the Western military apparatus completely dry, creating a massive deterrence vacuum that allows Beijing and Moscow to execute their primary strategic objectives entirely uncontested. Scenario 3 is the silent capitulation. Behind the closed doors and the public bravado of Operation Epic Fury, the institutional elite are forced into emergency back-channel negotiations. To prevent the absolute ruin of the global paper economy, they must secretly offer massive geopolitical concessions to the very same proxy networks they publicly claim to have neutralized. The state will quietly bow down to the shadow network. It is not a victory. It is an unmitigated strategic catastrophe. They knew the historical precedent. They knew the doctrine of asymmetric retaliation, and they chose to strike anyway. The mainstream media will not explain this catastrophic miscalculation to you until your portfolio is already gone. If you want to stay ahead of the intelligence curve and understand the real movements of power on the global chessboard, you need to subscribe to this channel right now. We do not deal in hope, we deal in coordinates.